All right, let's talk privilege and wokeism, woke, in this video. So, fair disclosure, some of what I say may actually offend you, it might trigger you, but you know what? That's a good thing, in my opinion. It's gonna be highly opinionated video, and you're more than welcome to disagree with me on it, and that's okay because we live in a world where free speech is allowed. But I'm going to unapologetically lay out my views on privilege and wokeism because I feel like I've been seeing it a lot on my feed, at least, and people have their opinions on it. I'm just going to share mine. So, first of all, let's define these two terms. Privilege, well, just some benefit or advantage that you have. And in the context of this video, it's benefit or advantage that you have either through a genetically attributed trait, like your gender, your race, or the socioeconomic status that you were born into. Let's say you were born into a rich family or a poor one or somewhere in the middle. So now let's define what wokeism is. And this is straight from Wikipedia. This is a very neutral definition, I think. So woke is an adjective derived from African American vernacular English, meaning alert to racial prejudice and discrimination. And beginning in the 2010s, it came to encompass a broader awareness of social inequalities such as sexism and LGBT rights. Okay, so now that we have defined it, let's revisit privilege for a second. I want to make clear that privilege based on race and gender, does it exist? Yes, absolutely. I have seen it in corporate. A simple example of this would be, let's say in a meeting, a woman is expressing her view that she strongly holds, and this may be perceived as coming across as bitchy, while a man doing the exact same thing is seen as a strong leader, charismatic oftentimes. I know this sort of double standard or male privilege to be true because my own sister has expressed this exact same displeasure. So moving on. Now, does privilege based on socioeconomic status exist? I would say even more so than privilege based on race and or gender. So if you're born into a wealthy two-parent household, you'll be afforded the privilege of having a stable upbringing that in turn lets you focus on academics, which is the greatest predictor of future success. And then you can add on the connections and the nepotism that exists in many higher paying corporate roles, which if you're born into a wealthier family, generally have access to a lot more of these connections. There's that's privilege based on race, gender, socioeconomic status. Now let's look at wokeism. And by the textbook definition or the Wikipedia definition I just said, being alert to racial prejudice and discrimination, it's good. It's a good thing. I don't think most rational people can disagree with that. You know, maybe if you're a racist, you do. Fair enough. I'm not. I happen not to be. But in practice, and here's my admittedly controversially held belief, wokeism in practice is anything but, but actually is creating racism and division in our society. And it's creating racism that otherwise wouldn't have existed at all. And worse yet, worse than even creating racism and sexism, is being used as a weapon of deceit to suppress the masses. And so let me explain what I mean by that. So one way wokeism has manifested itself in the real world is the usage of hiring decisions and university admissions. So let's say you are black, right? So you have to actually score less than that of a white, who in turn has to score less than that of a South Asian on the SAT to get into Ivy League schools. Recently, the Supreme Court in the US has actually struck it down, so you can no longer classify admissions based on race, which is, in my opinion, a good thing. But this has been going on for a while. And there are some managers in corporate that have the goal to hire X amount of women to increase diversity in leadership roles. And I know this to be true because my previous manager was very vocal about it, and it was very critical to his promotion path to hire women in leadership roles. So his goal was let's just hire women first, worry about the merit later. Now, this might seem good at the surface level, actually. There are many people that are actually for this. Fair, and I think that's seems to be the normal view, or the mainstream view is to be for this because, well, we're increasing representation of traditionally underrepresented groups. But I want to take a moment to look at the costs of this as well, and why even though it sounds good in practice, it may not actually be. So first of all, meritocracy is out the window. It becomes a game of how much of a victim you can actually portray yourself as. So let's take an example here. If you are biracial, half white, half black, like Obama was, you will want to identify as black as possible when it comes to admissions and hiring and all this stuff, which in a sense is actually enforcing, maybe not enforcing, but it's giving a encouraging kind of like a nudge to that old white supremacy belief that if you have any amount of another race in you, then you are entirely that other race. Because white supremacists believe that being white has to be purely white. So now if you're biracial, you no longer say biracial, you'll just start identifying as just black. That's just one example. It also patronizes underrepresented groups because you're effectively saying that, oh, you're black. Well, you need a little extra help, or you're a woman, you need this quota to get in. Or if you're black, we've like lowered the SAT score requirement because clearly the system doesn't think you can get the scores needed to be competitive on merit alone. It sounds very patronized, like I actually just said. So somehow it's no longer on the content of your character, but the color of your skin that influences your ability. Or that's what the system is saying, because it's saying, oh, you're this color, so you must score this much on the SAT to be competitive in the application, etc. So, and my third thing here actually is creates hidden racism and sexism. So people will internally think, but never externally vocalize, actually, for fear of cancel culture. I may have had some one-on-one private conversations here and there where they do, but they never in a group setting will ever externally vocalize this. Oh, that person got their job because they're black, or they're a woman, or they're trans, or some other underrepresented group, not because they were actually deserving of it. But in actuality, it could be that the woman who applied to the senior management role was actually the most qualified, had the best interview, aligned the best with the company values. But in reality, there'll be many that will actually question her leadership ability, even if unjustified, because they know that this sort of a system where, we have a woman quota exists, right? So it creates a lack of respect, even when the individual actually commands that level of respect based on their application. So now let's talk about wokeism and its usage as a weapon of deceit. And this is what I really don't like about it. So companies nowadays, they love to celebrate Pride Month, creating modified logos of their brand to show support of the LGBTQ movement. This is, in my opinion, if I was a CEO of a company, this is a fantastic and quite frankly cheap and easy way for a brand to appear good to the masses and be one of the good guys. When in reality, their goal will always be the same, and that is to maximize profits for the shareholder, and all else be damned. And they'll still lobby politicians the same way to preserve tax legislation in favor of these businesses and not advance and completely ignore real worker interests, like meaningful increases in wages, quality of life, for example, working hours, and other benefits. If you remember Occupy Wall Street, I think this was like right around the time of that recession in 08, 09. There was a movement actually to fight economic inequality, which is a good movement. I'm fully in favor of it. I'm very, very hesitant of free market capitalism, actually. That's where my stance is. But that was quickly actually forgotten. And in my opinion, and at least in part, because companies are sort of turning to LGBTQ, BLM, Stop Asian Hate, and other such movements to appear good, and that causes the masses to actually forget about economic inequality and instead actually fight amongst themselves and spawn sort of two broad groups. One is pro-LGBTQ, pro-BLM, and then those far right, sometimes racist, quite frankly, and somebody in the middle too, but those far right groups to like counter with like Blue Lives Matter or straight pride or something like that, right? Some reactionary thing to whatever it is Group A is trying to promote. And so now what's happened is that this keeps the division focused among the masses on Group A versus Group B, so that we forget who the real villains are, which is actually those corporations And I'll end with this, is that the real privilege is the same today as it was since the dawn of human civilization, in my opinion. And that is those who control the resources in some way, the wealthy, and those who work for scraps. Like that could be the slaves during the slave trade era. That could have been when British conquered India, and there was a lot of brutal practices there. It could be even older. It could be thousands of years old. It could be the slaves building the pyramids. It was a pharaoh and the pharaoh's family that had all the wealth, and the workers working for scraps, food if they're lucky, etc. So, so my belief is anyone trying to focus the conversation on anything but the rich versus the poor, especially when they're talking about equitable outcomes, is trying to deceive you. That's my opinion. Feel free to disagree with it. If you guys have a safe night, see ya.